My name is Mike Contompasis. I am the Senior Field Consultant for Mass Insight, an organization in Boston that has been focusing on turnaround. I've been doing this for about 8 to 10 months. Previously, I've spent 42 years in the Boston Public Schools. And I, too, am appreciative of the opportunity to share with you some thoughts around how do we take what is a national emergency and begin to think not only at the school level, but primarily as well at the state and district level. Turning around chronically underperforming schools presents a series of challenges that require new solutions with increased and enhanced capacity to develop and implement those solutions. We at Mass Insight feel that the U.S. Department of Education is on the right track with their recommendations in the Race to the Top initiative and the School Improvement Draft Guidelines. We feel that they should be supported. Previous attempts to help low-performing schools have been partial or incremental, so-called light touch approaches, often disconnected, lacking alignment, and often adding confusion to the individual schoolhouse. There are exceptions, and those exceptions are on a national scale. The so-called high poverty, high performing schools that on a daily basis beat the odds, that are characterized by the following: clearly defined authority to act based on what's best for children, flexibility, control over operating conditions to include all aspects of the operation of the schools, hiring, staffing, budget. 2, relentless focus on high quality hiring and staff development. 3, highly capable distributed school leadership teams. 4, additional time in the school day or across the school year. 5, performance-based expectations for all of the stakeholders. And 6, an integrated research-based programs with related social emotional services. We feel that those are characteristics that should be incorporated in all schools, in all school districts. Developing a scale-up strategy to address the needs requires, we feel, districts and states to develop the political will to act and the commitment to mandate fundamental change. We then offer 5 recommendations. 1, recognize the nature of change required. Incremental change does not get us to where we want to be. The goal of public policy on failing school intervention must be to spur fundamental, dramatic change that addresses the dysfunctions of the status quo, produces significant improvement within 2 to 3 years, and readies the school to grow into a high-performance organization. 2, we recommend that we recognize turnaround as a discipline. Federal policy should support the development and application of specialized turnaround capacity within schools and districts and among external partner organizations. The discipline requires specialized experience and training, resources, and support. Not everyone is capable of doing the type of work that's needed to the degree that we feel it's needed across states and across districts. 3, change the operating conditions. Turnaround requires a protected space that often creates a flexible environment in which the schools in that protected space are able to function. We're talking about zones or schools where clusters of individual schools that have been deemed to be the most in need of rejuvenation, if you will, that they be placed in some sort of protected zone and given the authority to make mission-directed decisions. Federal policy should provide incentives, both positive and sanction-oriented, that catalyze such policy and that encourage union, district, state bargaining on behalf of these specialized zones where applicable. We firmly believe that we've got to, in order to scale this to both the state and district level, clear out what might be called the underbrush that inhibits schools, school districts, and states from moving forward. We also recommend that these protected zones have lead partners as change managers. In other words, build the capacity to have a partnership with this zone that is freed from some of the inhibitions that might exist either at the state or district level. Currently, there are a whole series of well-meaning providers, all of whom act pretty much independently, for which there is little or no accountability for their action. We feel that these lead partners, if they are indeed provided, should have the flexibilities that we've talked about in changing the conditions, but should also have the ability to be held accountable for student achievement. And then finally, fifth recommendation is clustering for support. We think we ought to build a system that has 3 to 5 schools in one of these protected zones. These schools should be based on whatever may be the need of the system. They could be on student characteristics, feeder patterns, or by regions. Again, I thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
These schools around, and what should we really expect from that proposition? I'll go with you, Steve, since you were last.
Well, I could churn about lack of leadership of our state superintendent who doesn't take over any schools despite the fact that he's got the authority to, or the capacity of school districts to turn things around. But I think it's all of these questions I think come from leadership, and everybody likes to throw that word around leadership. Give me a little leeway on this metaphor. So I live in a city that's got 2 NBA basketball teams. One, I have been a Laker fan since I can remember what a basketball was. They've always had great ownership, great leadership at the top. They get the best general manager. They get the best coach. They've got a culture. When they have down times, they recover quickly. There's some lessons there. When they can take a journeyman basketball player like a Trevor Ariza, in that system, he becomes a much wanted, much sought after free agent. They take a first-year center, Andrew Bynum, and they don't match him up with just anybody who's in the office. They get a Hall of Famer, the best center ever, to mentor him. Right? Players want to do the toughest jobs. Like a 9th grade teacher should never be a first-year teacher. It should be the culture of that team should be, we want the toughest position. I want to guard the toughest thing. I'll take on the toughest challenge. I don't want to teach an AP class. So there's lessons there. Now, I also live in a city that's got the Clippers. The Clippers have been as bad as long as the Lakers have been good. Do I blame Baron Davis for that? Do I blame the NBA Players Association for that? Or do I start at the top? At the top. Now, there's capacity issues. We know what it takes to turn around schools. We know what it takes to run good small schools. There's management theories out there that are really relevant to this work. People in business say the decision made closest to a client is the best way to do that. That is kind of a trend nationally, except for education, where our product is teachers, but they don't have a say in what goes on in front of them. They don't make any decisions. There are practices out there. There are enough examples out there. Everything else has moved in the 21st century, but we have perfected and are obsessed with the perfection of a school district for the 19th century. We've got to evolve that, and it's got to explode, and it's got to start with leadership. And I know that gets thrown around all the time. Our president saying, look, we're going to lead the world in college graduations in 10 years is a huge thing to say, and he backed it up with some money. I think we're all dissatisfied across ideology and parties and class about our public school system. Now we just got to kick into what is needed, and it's hard. I live in a city where there are 100,000 employees in our school district in Los Angeles. 40,000 of them are teachers. So out of the 60,000, of course you need great principals, some bus drivers, and people to make sure the bills are paid. But you don't need 60% of your workforce to be non-teachers. That's hard decisions have to be made politically. What do you do with those patronage jobs that dominate school districts, urban core across the country? You've got to move them. And you got to do it humanely, but you've got to push money and resources and ideas down to the school sites with some strong non-negotiables, but high expectations. And we know what works. And so the excuse of no capacity is just that, an excuse.
When you look at the term leadership, it is the capacity and will of a leader to move men and women to the same common goal. The leader must be the master teacher. That, to me, that is key. They have to have the capacity to bring everybody in, teachers, and sit down and have a discourse of looking at the deficiencies of and the weaknesses in the building, come up with a plan, monitor the plan, and make sure that the discourse is one that is not intimidating or threatening. To me, is key. I'm lucky that we do have our administrators are within the buildings. They come in, they do walkthroughs, they monitor. We talk about these are the things we're seeing. We discuss what should we be doing at this point. They don't just sit back and do nothing. I'm glad that I'm in a district that takes that very seriously. Because if they're not in the building and walking through and looking at what's working, what's not working, but first we got to make sure they know what it's supposed to look like. That's why the leader has to be a master teacher, to understand the latent of the work and the manifest of the institution. So it's a collaborative effort working together, making decisions that's in the best interest of that particular school, because the interests or the needs of the schools are different. So I like the fact that we do have our central office. They come in as teams. They do walkthroughs. We debrief. We dialogue about what we see that is working, what is not working. We talk about how we can change and challenge those things. But it has to be a collaborative intellect between the two parties.
Anyone else? Mike?
I would echo the issue around capacity. I think you need to develop the capacity. If you have a district that isn't assessing what its return on investment is with the programs that it's currently implementing, I would argue that they have no idea what the value is of those individual programs. Turnaround is not something that won't come with some sort of cost. And, the NCLB money or the race to the top money or the stimulus money is not going to be there forever. And I do think that we need to take a look at what are the practices that are in place in a school district or at the state level if the shoe fits. And what can we better do, as was mentioned earlier, to push money to the school site? That's not an easy thing to do. There are inherent roadblocks everywhere you may turn. But I think we've got to take a look at those. And again, when I made my comments earlier, I talked about having the political will to make the necessary tough decisions that have to be made if indeed we're going to address this problem. There is no doubt in anyone's mind that these school districts still mirror what indeed they looked like 25 or 30 years ago, by and large. I mean, I would raise the issue of whether there are too many school districts across the country. I would raise the issue of whether the role of the school committee as such is as relevant as it may have been. Now, I realize those are local option questions, but I think that you've got to think seriously about what currently in place hasn't worked. We don't know whether indeed you can get districts to do the kinds of things that are necessary. You've got to change the culture of the district in order to move it forward.
Do you think it's less an issue of capacity and more an issue of political will?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I do.
Gar?
Yeah, I would. So, I mean, I would add, check on the leadership question, check to some extent on the political leadership question. I would also underscore, I think there are deep questions about role outside of schools. I think there's a refrain on this panel, which is figuring out how to support schools doing this work. I would argue that in New York, in our reconstitution efforts, we developed some pretty good processes for supporting schools as they were developing, supporting them in their own vision development. You can talk to Ms. LaCroix about that later. But I will tell you that in supporting schools, I spent most of my time fighting off other district offices and the state who wanted to get in and muck up the works of what principals like Ms. LaCroix were planning and trying to execute. And I think it's incumbent on us as we think about the question of capacity outside of schools to be thoughtful about what is the right role of district? What are the right ways to empower schools? What is the right role of the state? Every educator I've talked to loves to go do the school visit and walk through and provide counsel on what they see in the different classrooms. That can't be the role for every person at every layer of the hierarchy in education. You also asked a question about expectations. One of the goals, we set for ourselves a goal of 90% success for our new schools, defined as performance above average. It's important to say in that we were, from the outset, to some extent, setting a goal that recognized a failure rate and that we were going to not be successful with some of our turnaround situations. And I would argue that unless we are bold enough to accept those kinds of failures, there's no way we'll get to success with the majority of the turnaround situations we're trying to pursue.
In respect for your schedule here, I'll be a little bit glib if I can. From the state point of view, we think we have some mechanisms in place to try to maximize what capacity we do have. We don't have enough people to do everything we need to do. We have a lot of pressure on our local school systems by way of our master planning and by way of the NCLB targets and so on. So that means that we're basically setting these targets and stepping back in many cases for these school systems to let them do the work. In some cases, we've got 8 schools in a school district, and they don't have capacity. We've got other places that have 200 schools, and they've got a very committed school board and a very committed, highly skilled